Lessons from Asia. My name is Annie, and I will be facilitating this session for you. Our presenters today are lawyers from the Ius Laboris firms in Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and China. Okay, I will now hand over to our first speaker, Catherine.
Will be approaching. Singapore, on the other hand, has implemented many restrictive measures with the aim of containing their current second wave. An overview. So in Hong Kong, a restriction on all foreign visitors entering the city has been implemented on the 25th of March. For residents returning to the city, they are required to undergo a mandatory 14-day home quarantine accompanied with a Bluetooth wristband to track their movements. In Singapore, restrictive measures were not put in place until recently, as the spread of infection was contained early on. However, since experiencing their second wave, the city has closed all non-essential offices and businesses. In South Korea, there has been no general lockdown throughout the COVID period, and their effective management of the pandemic has been through their extensive and consistent testing and contact tracing. In China, as we know, the lockdown in Wuhan lasted from the 23rd of January to the 8th of April. They are now starting to open businesses again to return to life normally while trying to control a new wave of imported cases. So the story so far in Hong Kong, in 2003, we had a Sars epidemic where over 1,700 people contracted the virus and 300 people died. People in Hong Kong well remember their experience of the pandemic. In 2003, I remember the people in the city were all wearing face masks. When we had our first COVID-19 case confirmed in January, the people in the city immediately sought to take precautionary measures, as we had seen back 17 years ago from SARS, with the vast majority of people using hand sanitizers religiously and wearing face masks. And without government intervention, many of us had voluntarily practiced social distancing at the very early on. The number of cases in Hong Kong remained low and stable for some time until about 20th of March, when Hong Kong was hit with 48 new cases, the biggest daily tally since January. This was due to an influx of travelers coming into the city. This marks the second wave of cases. On the 25th of March, we closed our borders. This appears to have worked because on the 14th of April, the number of new cases dropped to only 3, and we have a total of about 1,012 confirmed cases in a city of a population of about 7 million people. So in Hong Kong, we have not yet imposed the general lockdown of the city, but rather we have introduced many restrictive measures to combat the outbreak. Since the 25th of March, no foreign travelers have been permitted to enter Hong Kong. Those who have been permitted to enter have had to be tested for COVID-19 upon their arrival at the airport and enter into a 14-day quarantine in their homes monitored by a wristband. The city has also had several closures in various high-risk sectors such as schools, universities, bars, spas, gyms, karaoke, and so forth. These closures have been implemented for a temporary 2-week time period. However, the government may extend this for as long as they consider necessary. Restaurants have not been ordered to close, but have been put on tight restrictions to only operate at 50% capacity, with customers sitting 1.5 meters away from each other. Additionally, a regulation has been imposed for a maximum of 4 people to be able to gather in a public place. For establishments that have not yet been ordered to close by the government, there are mandatory temperature checks and insisted use of hand sanitizers when entering most establishments such as office towers, shopping malls, and shops. Most companies have asked their employees to work from home, as I am working at home this afternoon. And this has been recommended by the government bodies, but is not mandatory. Last week, on the 8th of April, the Hong Kong government introduced their second round of the Anti-Epidemic Fund, which was initially introduced in February to combat COVID-19. The original fund consisted of 30 billion Hong Kong dollars providing subsidies to a variety of industries such as travel, retail, transport, and the hospital authority. The fund was focused on providing subsidies to the companies to sustain their businesses rather than to benefit employees. However, in the second round of the anti-epidemic fund, the government has moved its attention to the employees with the intention of keeping unemployment rates low. This new 137 billion Hong Kong dollar fund, which is approximately 80 billion US dollars, will provide employers with 50% of their employee's salary for 6 months with a cap of 9,000 Hong Kong dollars. That's approximately 1,100 US dollars per person per month. This will apply to all employers that make mandatory provident fund contributions. This is Hong Kong's mandatory retirement scheme, with the exclusion of government services and statutory bodies. So the first payout for this is expected to be by the end of June, and employers in the private sector can all start applying for subsidies sometime in May. The Hong Kong government has also announced in February that they would be giving all Hong Kong permanent residents aged 18 and above a 10,000 Hong Kong dollar cash handout. The details of this are yet to be announced, with the application process most likely starting in the summer months at the earliest. However, it is unclear when people will be receiving these payments. I will now hand over to Desmond Wee to talk about Singapore. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone, and so glad to have you join us today in our webinar. My name is Desmond Wee, and I head up Raja & Tan Singapore's employment practice. Now, where do I start with Singapore? For those of you who are online, who are already in the city-state, you know our current situation. But to the rest of you who are from different regions, perhaps a good summary of where Singapore is that we went from being the top boy in class, the first in show, to somewhere in the middle of the league table very quickly and not knowing what went wrong. Did we lose favor with our teachers? Did we suddenly not wake up one day to school and miss a whole load of homework? And that's really how Singapore sees itself. With a very successful containment policy in the first wave, we now find ourselves having to deal with a larger and more significant second wave of infections. At the early stages, we continued with life as if it was business as usual. We were able to manage the number of cases. We allowed our general population to continue with their daily life, with offices continuing to do business, and just to make sure that the safe distancing rules applied. But in recent weeks, and up until 2 weeks ago, Singapore started seeing a huge spike in terms of the number of infections. This firstly came from the number of returning citizens and residents and work pass holders from foreign countries. But in more recent times, and particularly the last week, the bulk of our infections have come from foreign workers due to their living conditions. But let me deal with that later. So where are we now in Singapore? Singapore currently is going through a circuit breaker period, and this is from the 7th of April to the 4th of May. It is a lockdown in everything but in name. If you look at the kind of prohibited activities in the screen in front of you, these are situations which would be quite commonplace to many of you in your various home jurisdictions. Having heard from my colleague the differences between Singapore and Hong Kong, Singapore workplaces have all been required to close, and there's a compulsory telecommuting obligation. The only situation where businesses can continue to work in their physical premises would be if they come under essential services. Schools have also been closed for 2 weeks. Again, this was a situation where in the early stages of the pandemic, schools were allowed to continue to function. However, with these current circuit breaker rules, there is a strong desire from the government to make sure that there is a short, sharp period by which we can enhance these containment measures that they are currently considering. Looking at the kind of prohibited activities going down the route, from the company's perspective, one thing to be very mindful of would be the ability of your work pass holders to come back to Singapore if they are currently outside of jurisdiction. There is a requirement that any work pass holders that are returning to Singapore must seek approval from the MOM before you arrive in Singapore. And certainly we have been advising clients in the last 2 weeks on situations where their work pass holders have actually arrived in Singapore but without seeking our approval. The action taken by the authorities has been firm and relatively swift. These work pass holders had their work passes immediately revoked, and the companies that they work for, most of them have been slapped also with a prohibition from applying for work passes for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's something that's very, very mindful that companies need to consider. From the perspective of permitted activities, essential services is as set out in what you see, and it really deals with health and social services, food, energy, environment, and the list goes on as stated there. For non-essential services, there is a provision that allows you to seek an exemption from the government, and the exemption would actually be in 2 categories. Firstly, a general exemption that allows you to continue to carry on business, or if that's not allowed, you can actually seek time-limited exemptions, which allows you or your employees to go back to the office to carry out certain specific work actions for a specific period of time. Balanced against this in terms of the measures that the government has put in place, the principle of containment remains very much at the forefront of their current strategy. And so together with the kind of measures of telecommuting and the closure of certain businesses, there are also regulations in place that enforces safe distancing measures. And you heard from Catherine earlier, in Hong Kong it was 1.5 meters. In Singapore, it is a mandatory requirement to ensure that you have a 1 meter distance, whether you are in a public place or where you are dealing in any workplace, in any office premises, regardless of whether you're in essential services or not. And enforcement of this has been quite strict as well. We've had situations where clients have called us up to say the enforcement officers have turned up at their premises and doing inspections, walking around with a tape measure and making sure that 1 meter rule is in fact accurately enforced. Now, in terms of helping the companies manage its workforce, certainly the current strategy of the Singapore government is to try to provide measures that would support employers in terms of keeping their employees. So there are regulations in place that requires companies to notify the Ministry of Manpower where there are any measures taken for the reduction of salary. You also see that along the lines of that kind of support of wanting to make sure that employees continue to keep their jobs, in the resilience budget and the solidarity budget that has come up, the government has introduced as one of the key planks a job support scheme that allows for a financial wage support of up to a certain percentage General industries will be at 25%, except that for April, it goes up to 75% because of the lockdown. And there are enhanced wage support levels for different industries, those in the F&B industry, in tourism, and in aviation. There are, of course, various other schemes that are set out there. On that note, let me pass you on to my colleague who will address you on South Korea, Sujang.
Thank you very much, Desmond, for your kind introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Sujang Lee, employment lawyer partner at Yurchon LLC, a South Korean law firm. And thank you so much for joining us here. And since you are listening, that means you are safe and healthy. And I really hope, like other colleagues here, that everyone in your family continue to stay healthy and safe in this challenging environment. And hopefully what we are sharing here will be helpful to you and your business. So what has happened to South Korea? Because if you've been following this pandemic situation, South Korea was one of the most heavily infected countries next to China in the earlier phase. So it started in Korea January 20th, and we have a number of confirmed cases over 10,000, and new cases are still rolling up. Yet, I guess one of the difference and one of the reasons why Korea has been relatively maintaining the situation was that we have daily tests to perform the COVID daily 15,000, 14,000 to 15,000, and that has been extended to everyone who suspects they may have a case or not. So this has been really effective to maintaining the outspread to others. And another thing is that, like in any other democratic country, not everyone likes government, and there are many people who criticize this government measures so far. But general sentiment is that people do trust the information that are released by the government. They think it is transparent. So people do believe the numbers that are released by the government, how many people have died, how many people have confirmed, etc. So I think that has been also effective in terms of managing people's sentiment. So in Korea, we have no lockdown order ever in place during the whole period. A limited industry have been partially shut down, like religious facilities and indoor sports facilities, entertainment facilities, where you have just a cluster of dead people gathered inside, indoor. In Seoul, they are ordered to shut down. In other places, it's still a recommendation, but a lot of people, a lot of industries have followed the government's recommendation. Schools are still not opened physically, but the general e-learning has reopened as of 9th of April. So the only facilities that are continued to be closed include daycare and kindergartens, because I think we have seen the case of Singapore, and we are concerned that it could happen to Korea as well, like a second or third wave. So it's kind of an interesting category to us. What are suspended activities versus permitted activities? Because most of things are going on. We never had any interruption in terms of business, and generally people's lives have been going on without too much interruption. Probably thanks to strong social distance campaign, and people wear masks religiously and use hand sanitizers and wash off their hands very strictly. Like in case of Hong Kong, we learned hard way through SARS and MERS a couple of years ago. So people have been ready to accept some of the inconvenience that were imposed on them, or they voluntarily took care of themselves. Health and safety measures, there are laws that impose some measures on the company, and a lot of guidelines, recommendations from the government. There is nothing really unique about what you should do. You make sure that employees to maintain good personal hygiene, provide products and masks And if there is a confirmed or suspected case, report to KCDC. And if in case of confirmed suspected cases, your workplace will be shut down for disinfection for a day or two. I guess the next topic will be the most interesting one to those who are listening to this webinar. Korea is notorious for having a very strict regulation and that mostly protect the employee side and pose a lot of burdens and restrictions on the company. That has not changed at all because of the COVID-19 outbreak, and which means that there are a lot of restrictions what you cannot do unilaterally. You cannot reduce people's working hours. You cannot reduce people's salaries. You cannot require people to take their unpaid leave or paid leave, and you cannot terminate people just because of COVID-19. However, if your business has been heavily impacted financially, that could constitute as a ground to start layoff. But there are other restrictions imposed in the law, and then those are very difficult to meet. And teleworking, flexible working hours, that has been available before, but like probably other countries, we haven't really tested yet. People were used to coming to office and working with each other, but due to this new challenge, a lot of companies have now experienced teleworking, and they found that it actually worked. So it will have some impact going forward as well. But like I said, people have resumed to workplaces because when they think it's more convenient to do that way. So if you just come to Korea, Seoul right now, you see people just carrying out their business as usual, just wearing masks. One thing that that's I think particularly interesting to you may be that you do have a limited discretion to close down your business temporarily, so partial shutdown or complete shutdown, just to mitigate this financial impact. If you close your business temporarily, that means you don't have any employee to work and they don't get paid. Yet, that's also subject to restriction under law that you have to still pay 70% of their wage. So it's not, financial-wise, it's not that much of difference, just a saving a bit. There are several government schemes to support people and business who are suffering. And let me explain about this employment retention subsidy part, the second one under type of support scheme. That is relevant to the companies who may consider temporarily shutting down their business or reducing the working hours in the context of partially shutting down business. So if you do, as I explained, you have to still pay 70% of their wages for those unworked hours. If you do that, and if you meet other eligibilities, then you can apply for this employment retention subsidy, and the government will basically recoup the shutdown allowances part, almost up to the 90% if you are a small company under 100 employees. And there are other subsidies that are directly payable to employees as well. In case of a confirmed or suspected case where you are ordered to be quarantined, that the government also comes in to pay about $100 per day. Because if you have a confirmed employee, you are not obligated to pay that employee. That will be considered as a sort of force majeure case, that it's an inevitable case. But if you do get this government subsidy, then you have to pay. You are going to relay, work as a liaison to relay this payment to the employee directly. That was all for South Korea, and I'm handing over to Tracy Zhu in Fangda for China.
Thank you, Sujan. Very interesting. Hello, everyone. This is Tracy Zhu from Fangda Partners, a China-based international law firm. I'm practicing in the labor and employment team of the firm. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you China's perspective. So let's take an overview of the current situation in China first. So the daily new confirmed cases in China are now limited at around 50 to 60 in average a day nationwide. Domestic cases are usually less than 10 in any locality, and the rest are cases coming from abroad, which have maintained double-digit growth for more than 30 days. Since 28th of March, a very aggressive restriction order was adopted that entry by foreign nationals holding valid Chinese visas or residence permits has been temporarily suspended. But the entry by foreign nationals with visas issued after this suspension notice was announced will not be affected. And as you already know, Wuhan, once the epicenter of the coronavirus, now reopened on 8th of April, last Wednesday. Businesses, including those in Wuhan and the wider Hubei area, are now starting to recover. Schools in some cities have been reopening since the beginning of April. But for some large cities like Shanghai, there is no clear reopening schedule for schools yet. So in the last 2 months, we can see a clear path of work resumption progress in China, which is getting back to normal gradually. In early February, when new cases were surging, companies allowed employees to work from home or work flexibly. They could only reopen their offices with the approval of the local authority. Companies should make a written application to reopen the workplace, and the approval standards were quite rigid. For example, employers needed to have sufficient face masks in stock and submit a very detailed work resumption plan covering various anti-epidemic measures, such as how they could take the physical separation of employees during work. Now we see around 80% of small and medium-sized enterprises have restarted work. Public transport is back to normal. Parks are reopening. Many companies, including restaurants, office buildings, shopping centers, are also returning to work. But we see control measures are still being taken everywhere. For example, when we enter office buildings and the metro, we need to take a very quick body temperature test first. And this is also the case for some residential communities. To resume work, generally speaking, employers have the legal obligation to ensure a safe and hygienic workplace. Therefore, they must take appropriate measures to clean and safeguard the workplace. This includes distributing face masks and disinfectant and regularly disinfecting the workplace. We also see some companies adopting ways to separate employees into groups, allowing only one group to work in the office at a time, like every other day or every other week. So with business recovery, our client's current focus is available cost-saving arrangement. Reduced salary and unpaid leave is feasible, but should be agreed with employees, usually by way of entering into a mutual agreement. So this is similar to some other jurisdictions where employers have had to suspend its operations in the production of the overall company, or, for example, certain business units, and employees have no work to do as a result, then affected employees should be paid their normal salary if the suspension is contained within one full wage cycle, which is usually 1 month. For longer suspension from the second month onward, employers can pay a low level of reduced salary to employees, which is generally around $200. This arrangement, we call it suspension of operation, could be adopted by employers unilaterally, means employees' consent is not required. So in terms of termination of employment, because in China, termination by an employer should be based on statutory grounds. In other words, termination at will is not allowed. So the coronavirus itself is not grounds for employers to terminate or make large layoffs, but grounds such as internal restructuring, which may lead to job elimination, and like mutual termination of employment may be possible, depending on the specific impact of the virus on the business. There are also some temporary governmental support measures in place, such as reducing employers' social insurance burden by postponing the annual adjustment of contribution base, which normally happens in April each year. And also like reducing the contribution rate for employers' portion of the social insurance, refunding last year's trade union fees for qualified companies, etc. Details of these supportive measures vary on a locality-by-locality basis. So if you are looking at the specific supportive measures in the city, you should check the local regulations in that city. Okay, that's all for China update. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have finished the first part of today's session, and we will now move on to hear what the future is expected to look like for each of the countries. Off to you, Catherine.
Hi, this is Catherine from Hong Kong. I spoke previously about a government fund that was introduced last week where employers can be subsidized for up to 50% of an employee's salary for a cap of up to Hong Kong dollars 9,000 per month. As to future planning, many businesses may start to apply for this epidemic fund in the coming weeks when the necessary applications become available. On this note, I received a question from the audience, and the question is this. The Hong Kong government announced an employee subsidy scheme last week, offering subsidies to employers who do not implement redundancies. What if an employer has not implemented redundancies but has obtained voluntary unpaid leave consent from some employees? Will these employers still be able to get funding? And my response to this is yes. If these employees have been are on voluntary unpaid leave, they will not be considered to be redundant, and they should be able to benefit from the employee subsidy scheme to have a part of their wages paid by the employer. So, you know, the information that has come up from the government has been scarce, but I believe that we will have more clarity on how the scheme will operate in practice in the coming days or weeks. Employers have also been exploring other cost-saving options and how best to handle their employees and avoid terminations. These include unpaid leave, reduction in compensation, temporarily withholding of salary to deal with any cash flow issues, and asking employees to take leave. In Hong Kong, the law does not provide for employees to be furloughed, similar to measures taken in the UK. Therefore, these are the main current alternatives to redundancies in Hong Kong. Do note that for all of these alternatives, you will need consent from the employee. Otherwise, employers will be at risk of claims for constructive dismissal or unreasonable variation of terms. However, with the new anti-epidemic fund stating that employers who receive subsidies will not be able to make employees redundant, companies will be waiting for guidelines on these measures to ensure that they can implement their cost-saving measures lawfully and effectively. Now, over to my colleague, Desmond.
Thanks a lot, Catherine. Now, the future in Singapore, to put it bluntly, the end is nowhere in sight yet. Singapore government is currently focusing on trying to ensure that its circuit breaker measures will have a decided and substantive effect in trying to contain the second wave. As I mentioned earlier, the second wave of cases had come about with the return of many students from Europe, and even then it was still hovering within the 50 to 70 daily cases. However, just from last week alone up until yesterday, you would see from my presentation that there has been a huge substantive spike in cases, and most of these would come from the foreign workers' dormitories where living conditions have been far from satisfactory. And when you look at it from the Singapore government strategy, there are now essentially two focus points. One is to make sure that you contain general community spreading, and the next one is to make sure that this particular area of foreign workers is properly dealt with. So on the note, Singapore is really trying to do a very short, sharp, and efficient approach to hopefully turn the corner sooner rather than later. Whether this succeeds, we certainly would take our cue from many of other examples around the world, and one of the key issues would be making sure that the general population does follow this. Now, from an economic perspective, Singapore government is certainly also very mindful of the impact on business. I mentioned the budgets that have been issued by the Singapore government, and in total to date, they have essentially announced financial support in our budget statement for up to approximately $60 billion, which is equivalent of about 12% of Singapore's GDP. This is unprecedented, and this is with a view to making sure that the base of the economy and the underlying business sentiments and fundamentals continue to exist even during this period. If you look into the future from this perspective, there will come a point in time where the debt bubble will grow to a certain situation. And the issue that many clients have been already now looking at is, when this thing blows over, how do you deal with the debt issue? And I would certainly say that there are already discussions at the highest level in terms of seeing whether there is a need for new law to help manage these things. But for the time being, at least until the 4th of May, Singapore is focused on trying to contain. On that note, let me pass you on to Soo-Jung.
Thanks, Desmond, again. So for South Korea, well, I want to say we are only focusing on the access strategy, but it is not. We still have a daily concern. And because people are now expressing fatigue and there are complacency of this measure so far, that people think that it might be okay not to do it, and you know, I'm just too tired of being at home, not going other places, even though people have been out places. And there are moms who are complaining that they have to take care of their children at home, you know, 24 hours, and I have to feed them every 3 meals, and that's too tiring. So with those, the government is trying to have some criteria for a transition from, so we are still in the most alerted status, the most serious one in terms of seriousness of alert. But we want to move to a different phase where it can be managed as with everyday prevention system. And the criteria we are looking at is daily confirmed cases must be under 50, which has been achieved so far. So from last week, we are having a 2-digit, under 30 newly confirmed cases. So one criteria, you may say that's been achieved. Another one is the confirmed cases with unclear infection route. That should be less than 5% of all confirmed cases, and number of patients has to decrease to half of the current number. And these were the criteria that were announced by the government about a week ago. As some of you may know, we had a general election yesterday, and the ruling party had had achieved a significant victory in this election, which may have meant that the general public are supporting this current government and what they have done so far. Which has impact to you maybe because the subsidies part, the financial support to business and employees, which could have been influenced by the result of the current election, may not be so. Our objective of this current government is not making not letting companies to lay off people easily. They want the company to keep the employees as much as possible because they are really believing in low unemployment rate. So it will be continuously difficult to lay off people or do fallout or other things unilaterally. You will need people's consent, as explained. But because Korea is heavily dependent on exports rather than domestic consumption, because of the economic impact to U.S. and European countries and China, we are going to see a huge impact on our economy overall. And we are expecting to have more cases on layoff, restructuring, and potentially bankruptcies too. So when you have those cases, be mindful that it has to be legally compliant. But I mean, life has to go on. Best of luck to everyone. And now move to China.
Thank you. So as the pandemic situation evolves, in the near future, ongoing impact on businesses will continue, especially for multinationals covering the Europe and the US regions. While unlike some other countries and regions, there is no government funding scheme applicable to large groups of employees in China, except for a subsidy paid to frontline medical personnel and infected patients. So if the number of unemployed people is becoming larger and larger, how to deal with this situation would be a question for the government. Layoffs and restructuring are likely to occur as well, but the practical difficulty for termination and layoff is that employers should still pay the statutory severance as the minimum compensation for termination. So this could be costly if the number of affected employees is large. So some of our clients are now considering a combined approach of reduced pay for retained employees and termination with some other employees. Regarding cut cost, an audience just asked, under what circumstances the employer in China could execute the pay cut arrangement decision unilaterally. So this is relevant to the suspension of operation arrangement I just mentioned. So first of all, if you want to adopt this unilateral suspension decision, the company should virtually suspend its overall operation or certain business units due to the business volume shrinking, and employees should stay at home having no work to do as a result. So in other words, if employees still have work to do, then this arrangement cannot be adopted. And after the conditions have been met, then the company could pay the normal salary to employees during the first month of the suspension, and from the second month onward, the company can only pay a low level of living allowance to employees until the business is back to normal and employees can be back to work. And the last point, we also see some employers now have to look at new ways of working, like employee sharing. Employee sharing is in essence a short-term intercompany secondment arrangement. The employer company who has a workforce surplus sends employees to work in the receiving company who has a workforce shortage. This arrangement is adopted in some industries like restaurants, food supplies, and food delivery. Companies in other industries are also exploring their ways to move forward stably. So that's a quick future perspective for China. Thank you.
We have now reached the end of today's session. As previously mentioned, if you have any queries for the presenters, you can contact them directly by email as well. If your query is related to a different jurisdiction, you can contact me at annie.laxo@iuslaboris.com or go to the people pages of our website to find the right contact. For some insightful information and further updates on the coronavirus, I recommend you visit the Ius Laboris Corona page, which is regularly updated as the situation evolves. From there, you can also upload our coronavirus guide for international employers with information from 57 countries. Don't forget that you can also find all this information in the attachment tab below. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for attending today, and thanks also to our presenters for their insights. So with that, this webinar will now be ending. Thank you.